Hi, everyone. Welcome to Riot's Lunch and Learn series. My name is Caroline Griffin. I am Director of Operations for the Riot organization, and I'm super excited to have Jesse Jones from Fourscore Business Law with us today. Jesse Jones and Fourscore have been supporters of Riot for a long amount of time, many years. We're very thankful for his support, giving back to the local startup community in Riot and in the Riot Accelerator program. Just a couple of quick reminders before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. It will be posted to Riot's YouTube channel and then shared out to the meetup page where you registered for this event. Please do keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat box. We will make sure to get all of your questions answered either in this session or afterwards by connecting you directly to Jesse. And those are all of my reminders. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Jesse. Jesse, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Caroline. Appreciate it. I saw a couple of names I recognized on the sign-up list, so good to see you guys. And if I don't know who you are, I'm glad that we get to be connected on this. So I'm going to kind of walk us through a little bit of sort of the initial thoughts and ideas around fundraising for startups. And this presentation is going to, it's supposed to be an hour long. I just told Caroline I've got a meeting that's not where I am right now. So I need to probably wrap it up about 15 minutes before that. But I've only got 15 slides. So it's, this is probably a 35-ish minute presentation if you guys don't have questions. And I would invite you to throw questions into the chat. We can stop and talk about things right, in context, or we can do it afterwards, whatever. But let me make sure you guys can all see the screen that I'm sharing as well. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna dive into this, and before we really dive into the actual topic for the day, there's a couple of slides that I always like to kind of put out there. One is just kind of a basic overview of who we are. We are a small team. Fourscore Business Law is a team of 7 people. 6 of us are in the Triangle. We've got 1 attorney out on the West Coast. We believe ideas deserve opportunity. So we work with a lot of early stage companies and other entrepreneurs and businesses that have some kind of innovative bent to them. That's sort of the common thread as innovation that runs through our client base. We have a number of principles that we kind of, we try to abide by. Really, boils down to treating people the way that we like to be treated when we hire people to do stuff for us. Let me switch over to the next slide here. Just basics of what we actually do. We basically do 3 things. We spend a lot of time doing angel and venture financing transactions. Most of the time we're representing the company, which is the issuer of the securities. In that scenario, sometimes we represent the investors, but I would say 90% of the time or more, we're on the company side. We also represent companies in mergers and acquisitions. So we help people buy and sell companies. We have a lot of clients that grow by acquisition, or companies that get to the point where they're ready to exit. And then we serve as outside general counsel for businesses that don't need or have internal counsel. For the most part, I'd say 99% of the time, our clients do not have internal counsel. And so we play that role for them. We handle a wide sort of variety of general counsel services. But we are not a full service firm with the team that is, formally inside the walls of Fourscore. Some of the things we do not, you can see on the screens that a basic list of the things we do handle. Essentially anything that is sort of a day-to-day corporate business commercial, we probably handle. But we are not litigators, so we do not represent our clients when they get sued or they need to sue another party. We bring in a litigator to handle that. We're not patent attorneys, so we don't file patent applications or trademark applications, but we have lawyers outside of Fourscore that handle that. And then, various regulatory things that are, a little bit more narrow and focused. We have basically what we call our external legal resources. If you take a look at our website, it's under the About page, and we have listed several, but not all, of the outside firms and lawyers and other professionals that we use to handle the things that we don't do. All right, so that's Fourscore sort of in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions if anybody has specific things about us or our experience or our team. But with that said, I'm going to dive into the topic for today, which we have called the legal lowdown on startup financing. Caroline asked if I would do this topic again. I've done this one before for Riot. And when I went back to look, it is, I mean, just like everybody else, 2020 feels like it was definitely longer than 1 year. But I haven't done this for over 2 years. So I made a couple of edits to this and updated a little bit, but this is the topic that we're gonna talk about today. So before we kind of get into any detail about different types of securities that can be sold or different people that might be investors in a startup company, I always like to think about sort of, your ultimate strategy, because people start businesses for all different kinds of reasons. And it's really, really important to know what your plan is. If things go according to your plan, what do you want to do? Are you starting a business because you want to be your own boss and you want to run this company until you retire? Or are you trying to start a business based on some technology that you've come up with and you want to build a business to a certain point and then offload it to someone who's going to run with it from there and then go do it again? It's really important to understand that for a couple of reasons. But one of them is, you might not need outside capital to do what you want to do. And taking money from investors is not something that should be taken lightly, because they become your business partners, and they're very hard to get rid of. If you make the wrong choice, you're probably going to be working with them until the company is done one way or the other. And so it's really important to know, what your purpose is, because that needs to align with your investors. And, you would not want to, in your own mind, be starting a business that you plan to run for the next 15 or 20 years, while at the same time taking investment funding from investors who expect to have a return in 8 to 10 years, because that won't line up with what you want. And you're going to end up with, difficulty down the line. It's always important to kind of think about the strategy. What do you really need? Why do you need it? What are you trying to do? And then always kind of starting with why. There's several reasons you might raise money and decide you need to take capital from outside investors. One of them is speed. You might have a really good idea or a good idea for a product or some new technology, and you could do it organically through revenue by building a business in a more traditional way, but there's no time for that, because you're going to have competitors kind of at your heels, or maybe there's already 3 or 4 other companies working on similar things, and you need to be able to advance the technology and get to market quickly. So speed is one good reason that you might need to raise money. Validation. So if you get the right investors behind your company, that can really kind of add to the way that other people look at your business, whether it's customers or other investors, or maybe employees that are superstars in whatever they do. It might be very helpful to be able to tell them that you've got X on your cap chart. So you can kind of get some validation out of those initial investors. Another reason why they're important too. And then of course, survival. Companies, especially at early stages, are pretty thin when it comes to their budget and capital, and it takes money to build a business. So there are times when you maybe don't want to raise money, but you're in a position where you kind of need to, because it's the only option you've got. That's not a great place to be, but it does happen. And so, we want to recognize reality. You don't want to raise money only when you have to, because you don't have a lot of leverage, and you will probably end up, selling pieces of your company at a value that you're not super happy about, or maybe to people that you wouldn't otherwise choose. So it's a reason, but not necessarily a good one. All right, so to run through a list of some financing sources and maybe some of their motivations for wanting to put money into your company. The earliest stages of financing are very commonly come from friends and family. And there can be a mix of reasons why any of these people will want to put money into your business. But if they are your friends and close family, they might just want to help you. They might not have any idea what you actually are doing or what your product is like or what the market is, but they know that they trust you and they want to see you succeed. And so they're going to write you a check. That is okay, but it is really important to understand that because it can lead to some challenges later if you are successful, especially if these friends and family are not accredited investors, which is a term that you'll probably be familiar with soon if you're not already. But then also friends and family probably would like to make some money as well. So, they're looking for a return in most cases. The crowd, there's a lot of different options in terms of crowdfunding now than there were 5 or 10 years ago. But basically the crowd is, a large number of people putting a relatively small number of dollars each into your business. The crowd really does, they're going to want to see a return, obviously, but there's also the opportunity, which, 10 years ago or even, maybe a little bit longer than that, people who were not accredited investors didn't really have the opportunity to invest in these types of companies because they're not publicly available securities. And there are all kinds of rules that make it really difficult, even still today, for unaccredited investors to put money into these types of investment, opportunities. So they're looking for the opportunity to invest. They want to see a return. Accelerator programs, they're looking to build a portfolio so that they can tell other companies, hey, we, whatever, Facebook, Google, Salesforce, whatever, the most successful companies went through our accelerator program. We've got a great network and we want to help you and you should come here instead of there. They're also looking for a return. Most accelerator programs that we have been exposed to or work with, will make a small investment and take a portion of the company in exchange for a little bit of money. But really access to their program and their network, their alumni network, and all the other stuff that they provide and try to help companies get to the next level with. Angel investors typically are, well, I guess I shouldn't really say this anymore. Angel investors and venture capital firms are really kind of starting to meld together in my mind. But typically you're going to have, if it's an individual investor, they're probably sort of more on the angel side. The way I usually think about it is angel investors are usually earlier. They might not be the very first money in, but they are probably investors that you would go to either before you have sort of deep pocket, big money VC firms financing your company, or possibly between rounds, but they're definitely looking for a return. Some of them tend to be more sort of socially conscious, or they've got a specific issue that they're trying to impact. And honestly, although it maybe seem dumb, but there's a lot of angel investors that kind of get together in groups and they just want to brag about the companies that they put their money into. And so that's, again, these are reasons why, not necessarily good reasons, but reality. Venture capitalists are usually pretty serious. They just look for a return. They want to help you, but they want to help you because they can help themselves if they help you. So they're typically really looking for a return. They're going to put a bigger amount of money in, probably a little bit later, when the company is just slightly less risky than at the very, very earliest stages. Banks, they're going to look for, a return. They're going to have an interest rate. That's usually not an option for a super early stage company because banks, are very conservative and they're not going to get into the upside. So they're less likely to make a loan to a super early stage company. But there are some that will. You look at Silicon Valley Bank and Square One and Signature Bank. There's all these venture banks, basically. There's a bunch of them in Durham. So that is sometimes a possibility, but not usually for the earliest stage. And then government is looking for economic impact. There are some government actual investment funds, but a lot of times what we're talking about is grants. So, the federal government, state government, they've got a lot of money to kind of put into new ventures. And if you can get it as a grant, that's pretty cool because it's not dilutive, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then savings, which what I mean by that is your own savings. You could be an investor in your own company. You might want to conserve equity. So you might want to buy a piece of the round when you are raising money from outside investors in order to keep more of the company. Or you might be in a point, again, maybe not a great reason, but there's no other option. There's nobody out there that is willing to put the money in. You have the money and you still believe in your idea and in your ability to execute it. And so you start doing stuff that you can do. So that, there may be other, sources out there, but this is a pretty, I would say this comprises most of the list of investors that we see, or financing sources. Maybe they're not all investors, but they all put money in. All right, financing types. Grants, I just mentioned that they're non-dilutive. They are typically either from government entities or some kind of special interest group that's, wants to further the research or the technology that your company is building. The great thing is they are not dilutive. If they're truly grants, that means you are getting the money, and you might have to show progress, you have to show milestones, you have to show budgets, et cetera. But the provider of those funds is not taking a piece of the company. They don't want the money back. And so that's great. Convertibles, there are multiple types of convertible securities out there. Safes are probably the most popular. It's an acronym. It stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. There are, like I said, a lot of other types out there, but safes are probably the most well used, and they are typically used at the very earliest stages of the company before you bring in outside investors on a priced round. Some of the benefits to convertibles like safes and convertible debt is that you don't have to immediately at that time put a value on the business, which is really hard to do at the super early stages. And then, the debt or the conversion provisions allow for the company to basically use a later agreed valuation to convert that money into equity at the next round. So I'll kind of work around in a circle there. So debt, there are, obviously you can take out a loan, you can use a home equity line or something like that. Again, you should talk to your CPA and your financial advisor before you do something like that. But what we see very commonly is convertible debt, which is where an investor comes in. They're giving you a loan, they're giving the company a loan, and the company is issuing a convertible promissory note to the company that has an interest rate and a maturity date, just like a normal loan would. But everybody understands the intent is not to pay back the principal and interest in cash. It's to use the principal and interest to convert into shares when the company raises money at a financing where they actually put a value on the business. And then equity, you as the founder will likely have common stock. And most of the time, I'd say 95+% of the time, your investors will demand preferred stock, which is, it is pro rata ownership on a share by share basis. But those preferred shares carry with them some additional rights. So even though you will most likely in your first and second round of equity financing still hold a majority of the company, there are going to be rights that you give to those investors that gives them some measure of control, even though they don't have a majority of the company. So they might have a board seat attached to those preferred shares. They might have certain consent rights that you're not allowed to do certain things without their consent. Maybe they don't have a director seat, but they might have an observer seat, which means they get all the same information that your directors get. Anyway, the equity rounds are the most complicated to do. But at some point, if you're going to raise money, you have to do that. It's hard to get your mind wrapped around sort of getting diluted as the founder, but people are not going to give you money for the most part unless they get something in return. And so The important part is to make sure it's the right partner, make sure it's the right amount of money, make sure you're getting, good terms that you're comfortable with and that or at least are very confident will help you execute the plan that you've set. Okay, so a couple of slides on mindset. The first one's on investors. The next one is on the founder. But as the founder, it may be helpful to think about what the investors are looking for, because you need to put together a pitch deck and you're going to go talk to dozens and dozens of investors before you find the right fit. So what are they really looking for? At the earliest stages, the most important thing is the team, without question. If this is a small group of smart people who are trustworthy and come across as genuine, that is probably 7 out of 10 of the points you need to hit in order to get to a yes from an investor. They also, and this is part of a strong team, but they're also going to be looking for executives who are going to listen to them. Not that they're in control, but they are going to put their money at stake and in the hands of the executives of the company. And so they want to make sure that these are people that are not, that just refuse to listen. But it's helpful to get advice from, many different angles, and they want to know that the people that they're putting their money into are going to, not sort of isolate themselves and just insist that their way is the only way. They're going to want to know that they have an ear that will listen to them. Obviously, they're looking for a good idea. They want to make sure that they think the problem that you're trying to fix is worth trying to fix, that the solution you're proposing makes sense. It's better than whatever is out there by some, reasonable margin, that they think you can do it. It's feasible. They like the technology. Maybe you have it protected with a patent or some other type of IP protection. And then the good investors, the ones you really want, are going to be looking for a company, a business, a team, IP that they can add value to beyond the cash that they're dropping into the company. They don't all do that. I mean, there are some pure financial investors out there, and sometimes they're useful. But especially when you're, when you are first going out to raise money, your first round, you really want to make sure that this is an investor who is looking to add value beyond just the cash. You don't want them necessarily to disappear. Switching over to the founder's mindset. So what's the founder or the CEO looking for in an investor? You want them to be able to fill holes in your expertise. You're not going to know everything you need to know. You're not going to have every seat on your team filled. And so if your investor is able to either, suggest somebody, or maybe they personally have expertise that would be useful, that's more sort of an angel investor type scenario than a pure VC, where a venture capitalist is probably going to have the network because they've worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of companies, hopefully many of which have exited well. They may have, people on their bench basically that they can pull to help you fill in the holes you have. Founders looking for a strong track record. You're probably going to want to talk to some of the companies that this investor has been involved with to make sure you get a full and accurate picture of who they are. It's not let's have a 30-minute conversation over coffee and then I'm going to take a check from you if you want to put the money in. Ideally, you're going to take your time. You're going to talk to multiple investors, make sure that that they are the type of investor that people say good things about, that they're useful, they're helpful. You want them to have connections to other capital, because chances are you will need to raise money again. And so either they are a large fund that has cash set aside to do follow-on rounds for your business, or they have good connections to other venture capitalists, and potentially a history of bringing in other investors to later rounds, that you're going to be able to get the capital that you need without spending an inordinate amount of time and effort and energy doing it later. And then just relationships generally are really important. They may have relationships with potential customers. They may have relationships, like I said, with other executives or other, high sort of achieving employees, whether they're technical or not. And then finally, honestly, just like when you hire somebody as an employee, it's super important to understand what the culture is that you're trying to build. When you're hiring employees, you want to make sure that anybody you're taking funds from is a good culture fit, that they're not going to drive you crazy. Because like I said, once you take their money, they are on your team. And so take the time to get to know who they are before you do that. What can you do to increase your chances? So you're going to, like I said, pitch to many, many, many investors, most likely, before you decide on the right fit and, find somebody that is interested in your company as well. So first of all, I think it's helpful to define success before you start, so you know what you're aiming at. Make sure you know how much money you really need to raise at this round to get to the next level. Money gets cheaper as long as you're doing well. So the first round is the most expensive round that you're going to do. You're going to sell the biggest chunk of the company in that first round because your valuation is going to be lower than it ever will be again, hopefully. So you need to know kind of in your plan, what do you need in order to get to the next point where you can see a generous increase in the valuation of the company before you go raise more money. So keeping that in mind, you don't want to raise too much because you're going to sell too much. You also don't want to raise too little because if you fall short of your milestones, that's not a good place to be. That's where you end up without leverage. You need the cash to get to where you thought you were going to be before. And, now you're sort of in this wheel of inefficient fundraising. Do your homework, know who the investors are that you are trying to get in touch with and pitch to. Make sure that they are investors that invest in the area and the stage and all the other characteristics of the company that you're building, so that you don't have to try to talk someone into, putting money into something that they have never done before. Internally, you want to make sure you get your books and records in order, both from a legal and an accounting standpoint. There will be due diligence if the investors you are taking money from know what they're doing. And so you hope that's the case, because you don't really want to be taking cash and capital from those who don't. So you need to make sure your stuff's in order. Your corporate documents need to be filed correctly. Your founder documents need to be signed, and they need to be complete. They need to make sense. They need to have, the vesting schedule set up in a way that is, relatively normal, or there's got to be a really good reason why you're doing it differently. You want to make sure that if you have taken any funds from anybody else prior to your first professional round, that you have documents for them, that you have issued the securities, that you've made securities filings. All of those things are important and going to be looked at pretty closely in diligence. You want to be realistic. So although you want to define success and set your goals, you do want to be realistic. So, you don't want to walk in asking for some amount of money on an absurd valuation that you really can't defend in any way. Valuations are extremely, it's an art, especially at the earlier stages, more than a science. And so you want to make sure you understand what is market, so that you can kind of get ready and be realistic about what you're asking for. And then, preparing a term sheet, you may not need to prepare a term sheet. When we have clients that are doing financing rounds that are led by venture capital firms that are outside of the triangle, some that are in the triangle too. But if the investors are from the West Coast, or they're from New York or somewhere else, they're going to have their own term sheet. You really don't need to give them one. But in those cases, you certainly want to at least know what you're asking for. If you would prefer to sell convertibles because you don't want to deal with the valuation, if you would prefer to sell a priced round, if you don't really care how much money you actually need, all that stuff is really, really important. If you are raising money from angel investors or less sophisticated investors, then you probably will need to have the term sheet put together. You need to work with your lawyer to make sure it makes sense and is going to work for everybody. But you're probably going to have to go with it so that you have it to show and tell those investors what you are looking for. We've got a couple more slides here. So how to walk into an investor pitch. You certainly want to know your basics. You got to have your team together. Again, your team is super, super important. So I always like to see the pitch kind of not necessarily start out with the team, but very early on in the pitch, you want to make sure that you are harping on how great your team is. Know what your problem is, know what the market is, know how your solution is better than what's out there. All that stuff is important to be prepared with. I mentioned this earlier, but you definitely want to know the investor and know their interests. You don't want to be pitching to the wrong type of investor if you are way too early or way too late for them, or if you're asking for way too big of a check or way too small of a check, or if you are just not in the right industry. So all those things are super important. There's a lot of tools out there you can use. Crunchbase is free for the most part, and you can look up venture firms and kind of see what types of deals they do. There's also a publication called PitchBook that is outrageously expensive, but it is extremely good. And so if you have a service provider or some other access to that, you can run reports through that in order to get some really good insights into potential investors that you're connecting with or that you're about to pitch to. Have confidence. You want to make sure you walk in with your pitch deck. You want to know what you're saying. You want to know what you're asking for. You want to believe in what you're doing. I don't think anybody would go through the pain of trying to raise funds if they didn't believe it, but that's certainly important. You want to come across as believable, credible, and confident. Know what you're asking for. Again, how much money you need to hit this. So explaining, here's what we need and here's why we need it, because we've got this today and we need to get our prototype done and we want to get our first customer, or whatever your plan is. You want to make sure you know exactly what you're asking for. And then keep it short and simple. Investors, just like everybody else for the most part, tend to have shorter attention spans. And so you don't want to be going on and on and on for an hour when you can get it done in 30 minutes. This is one that's not in here, but if you have a hardware product, which I know a lot of you probably do, or at least part of your product is hardware, I always think it's super impactful if you can bring a physical, like a sample, and actually show people what it looks like. I like that a lot. You don't have to, and a lot of people won't be able to because it's too early or because they're just not a hardware company. But the more you can make it a show and tell, I think the better. It's my opinion, I guess. What if you keep getting no? So you are going to get no a lot, probably. And so it's always good to ask for feedback. Some investors are way better at this than others. There's a really large and very successful venture firm called Andreessen Horowitz out on the West Coast, who they have an entire system for how to appropriately relate to companies that they say no to. And I was blown away. I assumed these guys are way too busy to deal with explaining why or giving feedback to companies that they're not going to put money into. And so I was pretty impressed listening to one of their partners talk about how they handle the companies they say no to, because they say no to a lot of companies, like a huge majority, probably well over 90% of the companies that they see, they're not going to invest in. And they take a very sort of, humanizing approach to it. They know it's hard to put yourself out there. And it's hard to be rejected when you really believe in what you're doing. And so anyway, that's probably not the norm, but I was really surprised that one of the biggest, most successful firms out there does that. So it's always good to ask for some feedback. And that might help you figure out how to de-risk it a little bit. It could be that they're not sure that the market is as big or as healthy or as ready as you think it is. It could be that they're not certain about your team. And that would be a hard one to swallow for me, but that would also be really important. If I'm the business guy and they don't think my technical guy, or they don't think I am the right business guy, that would be super important to understand. You could apply to an accelerator. There's a lot of them. Techstars, Y Combinator, 500 Startups. Those are some of the bigger, better, well-known ones, but there's a lot of local ones. There's a lot of accelerators that have popped up and are specific to, types of companies, industries, just like rap. So obviously you're going through, or maybe not obviously, I think everybody on here is going through rap or has gone through rap, but just because you've done one doesn't mean you could not do another one if you're not quite ready. And so that's a definite possibility. The last point on there is, build a quote real business. That's not to say that venture-backed companies are not real. We have a ton of clients that are venture-backed, and they are real businesses. But what I mean by that is perhaps there's a way that you could kind of go back to the beginning that we talked about financing strategy and figure out if you really need to build a business through outside financing, or if maybe you can build a business that grows through revenue and profitability. When you think about it, a very small portion of companies are built through outside financing, at least venture financing. There's probably a lot that are built through bank debt or other types of, more traditional types of financing. But if you're getting money from a bank, you're going to have to show them that you're actually going to be able to be profitable, because otherwise they won't get their money back. And so maybe that's the answer. Maybe your business is not one that really needs to be venture backed, and that could be great. So if you keep getting no, maybe that's something to, a line of thinking to go down. I think I might have one more. No, actually, that is it. So I held true to my roughly 35 minutes if we didn't have questions interrupting me. This is just some screenshots from our website. Please feel free to take a look at our site. We have a ton of stuff that might be helpful. We've got an ebook called The New Business Blueprint that you can download for free. We have a handful of white papers on various subjects. One is on venture financing, angel financing for founders, that you should take a look at. We've got a couple of different video series. We've added a bunch of stuff over the last year and a half. So please take a look at that. I believe that is it. So if anybody has questions, I'm happy to chat for the next 10 minutes or so. And if not, I'm sure Caroline can give you my contact info, and I'd be happy to connect with you later.
Thanks so much, Jesse. We do have a couple questions here, so I'll just go in the order that they were placed, and then if we don't get to yours, I'll connect you directly to Jesse. The first one is, are there any good sites or sources for non-dilutive financing sources at pre-seed or pre-angel stage where the MVP is just being built and product market validation is being figured out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I have a list that might be kind of dated right now, but if whoever that was, if you want to shoot me an email, I will try to find that. Grant money is usually pretty early. So if you can find, I definitely have somebody to connect you with. There's a guy, I'm blanking on his name right now, but there's a guy over at First Flight whose job is to sort of help companies identify which government organizations to look at for grants. And that would be a really good place to start. So if you shoot me an email, I will definitely connect you. His name is Emil something. I can't remember his last name, but I'll definitely connect you with him.
Thanks, Jesse. And I did pop Jesse's email in the chat just so everyone has it. The next question is, a number of sites have sample cap tables on the distribution of shares at various stages of a startup. Do you have any guidance you can give to us on where equity typically lines up from angel to seed, et cetera?
Well, it can vary a lot, but I guess I would say, in your first priced round, which would probably be preferred stock, you're probably going to sell between 15 and 30% of the company. It depends on obviously the valuation, how much money you raise, but also whether you have convertibles and what the terms on those conversions are. But that's probably about where you're going to be. Your second priced round is going to be a little bit less than that, probably 20-ish%. And then from there, it really kind of varies widely. I don't know. I'm not sure if I have any like resources to kind of point you through. That's just mostly from what I've seen.
Thanks, Jesse. This is quite a long question. Don't many investors avoid companies that are trying to race to get ahead of competitors to get to market, sometimes seeing it too risky? And then the follow along was that most of the presentation was geared towards teams. What is different for solopreneurs?
Okay, so first question on sort of the risk. I mean, these are, in my view, the riskiest investments that there are. And so typically the investors that are putting their money into these companies are pretty, they're not very risk averse, at least not at the super early stages. With that said, they are all different. And so that's part of kind of doing your homework, understanding what kind of companies they've invested in before, because you don't want to waste your time talking to a company who is not going to put money into a business that's at the stage you're at. So they're all different. You need to kind of, do some research and figure out who you're going to be talking to. For solopreneurs, I think that is a unique challenge because from what I have heard and seen, I would say most investors aren't super comfortable with that scenario. That does not mean that you won't find sort of the angel investor type who is able to maybe provide some of the resources that you would otherwise have if you had a team of 2 or 3 or 4 founding partners. But I think by and large, it is significantly harder to get financing from these types of investors, or even to be accepted into like the accelerator programs that you might want to be into if you don't have, the bases covered sort of with your founding team.
Thanks, Jesse. I think we have time for just 1 to 2 more. We'll take one here. If your goal is to get accredited and institutional investors in the future, when you don't have any income, would you recommend starting out as a C Corp, or is it best to start out as an LLC and then convert to a C Corp once you pull in investors that want different classes of stock?
That's a great question. And that's something that we would definitely talk about sort of in strategy at the beginning of a business. And a lot of times it involves a CPA too. So the main advantage to setting the company up as an LLC at the beginning is that if you don't have investors and you don't have income, you're going to have to be spending money somehow. So you are probably going to be financing the operation of the business at the earliest stages. And if you personally have income from some other source, a lot of times you can use the losses from this new business to offset income that you're bringing in somewhere else. So that can be a really good thing to do. But like that question mentioned, 98+% of the time, investors will not put money into a pass-through entity. And that's for various reasons. But the short answer is at some point, you're going to have to be a corporation. One of the biggest benefits to being a corporation is that you may be able to set the company up to qualify for QSBS stock, which is a great program that I think is actually under fire right now, sort of at the federal government level, but hopefully we'll make it through unscathed. And it allows you to basically reduce your tax hit once you sell the business at the end. But you have to be a C Corp to do that. You have to hold those shares as a C Corp for at least 5 years. And there's a couple, not a whole bunch, but there's a couple other requirements. We have a couple of articles on QSBS on our website if you're more interested. But so all those kind of considerations have to be taken into account. It's a great question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jesse. I think in the interest of time, we'll cut it here. I strongly encourage you to reach out to Jesse. I will post his email again when I share the video recording. Thank you so much, Jesse, for being with us. As always, very informative. We really appreciate your time. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Caroline. Thanks to Riot for having me, and good luck to everybody. I hope to hear from some of you soon.
Thanks, y'all. Take care. Bye.
See ya. Bye.